Ray Dalio sat in his office in 1982, staring at the numbers. Mexico couldn't pay its debt. He had bet everything on the opposite. Every dollar gone. He'd have to borrow from his uncle. But what he learned that day would prepare him to make the world's biggest warning 43 years later. I thought I understood how the world worked. I was wrong about everything. The phone kept ringing. Clients wanted answers. Bridgewater Associates had lost everything. Ray didn't pick up. His wife found him that evening, sitting in the dark. Ray, what happened? He studied every major debt crisis in 500 years. Patterns emerged. What he saw made his blood run cold. But here's what nobody knew that night. Ray wasn't broken. He was transforming. He started asking, why was I wrong? Ray noticed something in the historical data that economists had missed. Every 50 to 75 years, the same thing happened. Countries would borrow more, then collapse. It wasn't random. It was a cycle, a predictable mechanical cycle. In 1930s America, it happened. In 1980s. Latin America, it happened. And now looking at the data in 1982, Ray realized something terrifying. The cycle was starting again. But this time, it was global. He called it the long-term debt cycle. The next debt crisis was coming, but not in 5 years, not in 10 years. He wrote everything down, created models, built systems. His colleagues thought he was obsessed. Ray, you need to move on, they said. He couldn't, because the numbers were showing him something nobody else could see. The math pointed to somewhere between 2025 and 2030. His team resisted. You can't remove human judgment completely. By 1985, Ray rebuilt Bridgewater. He implemented radical principles, not emotions, pure mechanical decision-making based on historical patterns. Wait, stop right there. You're probably thinking, how could someone predict a crisis 40-plus years in advance? That's exactly what everyone asked Ray Dalio. And that's exactly what makes this story so shocking. The principles worked. Bridgewater grew, but Ray never stopped tracking the debt cycle. Human judgment destroyed me in 1982. Not making that mistake again. In the 1990s, boom! Ray saw warning signs. We're borrowing from the future. Debt cycles have 3 phases: expansion, bubble, crash. We're in phase 2. Phase 2 always feels like it'll last forever until it doesn't. But here's what nobody expected. His finger traced a chart ending around 2008. The data says 2007 or 2008. I'm just following the cycle. Ray, this seems overly pessimistic, one client said. Fast forward to 2006. Ray presented to clients, preparing for the coming debt crisis. The economy was booming. People were confused. Wall Street was shocked. How did he know? Most clients left. A few stayed. September 2008. Lehman Brothers collapsed. Trillions evaporated, except Bridgewater. They profited. I didn't know. The cycle knew. 2008 wasn't the big one, he said quietly. It was a warning shot. But what Ray told his inner circle was more disturbing. 2008 wasn't the big one, he said quietly. It was a warning shot. His team looked confused. That was the worst crisis since the Great Depression. Ray pulled up his long-term charts. In 1971, we left the gold standard. That started a new 50, 75-year debt cycle. 2008 was mid-cycle, the real one. His finger moved across the timeline. 2025 to 2030. The room went silent. You're saying something worse than 2008? Ray nodded slowly. Not just worse, different. In 2008, governments could borrow to fix problems. Next time, governments will be the problem. That's when everything started coming true. By 2020, something unprecedented happened. Governments printed more money in 1 year than in the previous decade. COVID-19 had triggered the money printers. Ray watched carefully. This accelerates everything, he told his team. In 2022, inflation returned. Central banks raised interest rates. Ray knew what came next. The debt trap was closing. By 2023, U.S. national debt exceeded $33 trillion. Interest payments were becoming unsustainable, but nobody in power seemed to care. They think they can keep borrowing forever, she said. Every empire in history thought the same thing. Now, here's where the story takes an even darker turn. December 2024. Ray Dalio appeared on a financial podcast. The host asked about his predictions. Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that sent shockwaves through the financial world. In 1930, it took 3 years from the first warning signs to full crisis. In 2008, it took 2 years. This time, he paused. I think we have 18 months, maybe less. 18 months until what? The host pressed. Until the mathematics of debt become impossible to ignore. Until markets force governments to choose between default and hyperinflation. Neither is good. The host pushed further, but governments have tools. They can raise taxes, cut spending. Ray interrupted gently. Theoretically, yes. Practically, when was the last time a government cut spending before being forced to? When did politicians voluntarily raise taxes enough to matter? They won't act until crisis forces them. By then, it's too late. Social media exploded. Some called him a doomsayer. Others called him a prophet. But Ray didn't care about either label. He only cared about the numbers. And the numbers were screaming. By early 2025, the evidence mounted U.S. debt to GDP hit 125%. Interest rates stayed elevated. The government spent $1 trillion more than it collected every 100 days. But the real shock came in March 2025. A confidential report leaked from the Treasury Department. Internal projections showed the U.S. might face a debt crisis by late 2026. The report was quickly denied, buried, dismissed as theoretical scenarios, but Ray Dalio got his hands on it. When he read it, his face went pale. They know, he told his closest advisors, they've known for months, they're not telling the public. One advisor asked, "What does it say exactly?" Ray looked up, his voice steady but grave. "It says if interest rates stay above 4% and debt keeps growing at current pace, the U.S. government will face a funding crisis by Q4 2026, possibly sooner." The report models 3 scenarios. Best case, orderly restructuring. Middle case, inflation spike to 15%. Worst case, he paused. Complete loss of confidence in the dollar. They actually wrote that? Page 47, marked classified. Someone leaked it because they're terrified. No one in power is taking it seriously. But what Ray discovered next was even more disturbing. Ray started noticing unusual activity. Foreign central banks were reducing U.S. Treasury holdings. China, Japan, Saudi Arabia, quietly diversifying away from dollars. This is how it starts, Ray explained. Countries stop trusting they'll be paid back. They move their reserves elsewhere. The data showed moves to gold, Bitcoin, real assets, anything that doesn't depend on a government's promise. The pattern matched every major debt crisis in history. The smart money always left first. Quietly, Ray made a decision, time to warn the public directly. In April 2025, he published an article titled "The 2026 Debt Crisis, Why This Time is Different." The opening line was brutal. We are 18 months away from a debt crisis that will make 2008 look manageable. Here's why you should prepare now. The article went viral, 50 million views in a week. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the warning. It was what Ray said you should do about it. Ray laid out 4 specific moves, not vague advice, concrete actions, the kind of clarity that only comes from someone who's been wrong before and learned from it. First, Ray wrote, understand that cash won't save you. When governments face debt crises, they print money. That destroys cash value. In 1920s Germany, people who held cash lost everything. In 1940s Hungary, it happened again. Your savings account won't protect you this time either. Second, diversify across countries and currencies. The US dollar has been the world's reserve currency for 80 years. That's ending. History shows reserve currency status lasts 80 minus 110 years before transitioning. We're at year 80. Don't have all your assets in one currency. Spread them across multiple countries with lower debt levels and sound fiscal policy. Third, own real assets, gold, real estate, commodities, infrastructure, things that have value regardless of what any government does. These assets have survived every debt crisis in history. When paper currencies fail, real assets endure. Fourth, and this is where Ray said something that shocked even his critics, own some Bitcoin. The financial establishment erupted. Ray Dalio, the man who called Bitcoin a bubble, is now recommending it. The criticism was intense, but Ray was calm. I was wrong about Bitcoin, he said in a follow-up interview. I judged it emotionally, not systematically. When I analyzed it through the lens of monetary history, I realized Bitcoin is the first asset in human history that governments cannot confiscate, cannot print more of, and cannot control. It has a fixed supply. It's globally accessible. It's outside government systems. In a debt crisis, that matters enormously, but even Ray didn't know how fast events would unfold. May 2025, a major U.S. bank failed, not a small regional bank, a top 10 institution. The government stepped in, guaranteed the deposits, printed more money to cover losses. Ray saw the headlines and felt a chill. It's starting earlier than I thought. June 2025. 2 more banks faced liquidity problems. The Federal Reserve opened emergency lending facilities, more money printing. Markets rallied. The Fed has our back, traders celebrated. Ray wasn't celebrating. He watched the debt clock, $34 trillion, $35 trillion. Every time government solved a problem, debt grew. Every time debt grew, the end moved closer. We don't have 18 months anymore, he told his team in July. We might have 12. August 2025. A routine Treasury auction failed. For the first time in modern history, the U.S. government tried to borrow money and couldn't find enough buyers. Interest rates spiked. Markets plunged 7% in one day. The government blamed technical issues, promised it wouldn't happen again. But Ray knew better. This is the moment, he said quietly. This is when 1930 became 1931, when 2007 became 2008, when the cycle shifts from slow burn to rapid crisis. He sent an urgent memo to Bridgewater clients. The math is no longer theoretical. We are entering the final phase. Take protective action immediately. Some listened, others thought Ray was overreacting. After all, the government fixed the auction. Markets recovered. Everything seemed fine. But Ray knew something they didn't. He'd studied 48 historical debt crises. Every single one followed the same pattern. Warning signs appeared. People dismissed them. Then came a failed auction or banking crisis. People said it was contained. Then came false calm. This is that period, Ray explained. The false calm. It always lasts 3 to 6 months. People think crisis was averted, but underneath the mathematics haven't changed. The debt is still there. Interest payments are still impossible. The next shock is coming. When? Ray looked at his charts, his models, his 50 years of experience, late 2026, possibly as early as spring. Then something happened that even Ray didn't anticipate. September 2025. China made an announcement. Starting in 6 months, they would no longer accept US dollars for oil purchases, only yuan, gold, or Bitcoin. The news sent shockwaves through global markets. Ray understood immediately what this meant. The dollar's reserve currency status is being challenged. This is phase one of de-dollarization. Phase two will be worse. Within weeks, other countries joined. Russia, Iran, Brazil, Saudi Arabia announced they were considering options. The dominoes were falling faster than Ray's models predicted. I've been tracking a 50-year cycle, Ray told a small gathering of clients in October. But cycles can compress. What I thought would take until 2028 might happen by 2026. When confidence breaks, it breaks fast. The mathematics are accelerating. An older client, someone with Bridgewater since the 1980s, raised his hand. Ray, I remember 1982. I remember when you lost everything. What's different now? Ray's face was serious. His answer deliberate. In 1982, I was wrong about one country's debt crisis. One country. This time I'm watching the entire global monetary system shift. The Bretton Woods system took 30 years to collapse from 1944 to 1971. The current system has lasted 54 years. We're past due. If I'm wrong now, we'll all be fine. We'll laugh about this in 2030. But if I'm right, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The room was silent. These weren't novice investors. They understood exactly what Ray meant. December 2025 arrived. The world entered a new year. Looking back at his office in 1982, Ray remembered that young man who thought he understood the world, who bet everything and lost, who had to borrow from his uncle. That failure had been his greatest teacher. It taught him humility. It taught him to build systems instead of trusting intuition. It taught him that the most dangerous moment is when you're absolutely certain you're right. Now, at 76 years old, Ray Dalio faced the biggest test of his life's work. Not for himself. Bridgewater would survive. He knew how to protect capital in a debt crisis, but for everyone else, for the millions of people who had no idea what was coming. In his final interview of 2025, a journalist asked Ray, what keeps you up at night? He thought for a long moment. In 1982, I was arrogant. I thought I knew everything. I learned I knew nothing. I spent 40 years building a system to never be that wrong again. Now my system is telling me we're approaching a crisis bigger than 2008, bigger than 1930. What scares me is that I could still be wrong, but what terrifies me is that I might be right. The journalist pressed, and if you're right, what happens in 2026? Ray's answer was measured, careful, but clear. If the mathematics continue on their current path, by late 2026 or early 2027, the US government will face a choice: default on its debt or print enough money to cause serious inflation. Neither option is good. Both options are painful. How painful? In the 1930s, unemployment hit 25%. In the 1970s, inflation hit 13%. I think we'll see elements of both: high unemployment and high inflation. It's called stagflation, and it could last years. The interview ended. But Ray's warning continued to echo. As 2026 began, the signs were everywhere. Treasury yields climbing, dollar weakening, gold hitting new records, Bitcoin surging. The smart money was moving. The pattern was playing out exactly as Ray's 50-year cycle predicted. Whether his warning would be heeded or ignored, only time would tell. But Ray Dalio had done what he set out to do. He'd learned from his biggest mistake and used that lesson to see what others couldn't. The man who lost everything in 1982 had spent 44 years preparing for 2026. The question now was, had anyone listened? The mathematics were clear. The history was clear. The cycle was clear. What happened next would determine whether Ray Dalio's life's work would be remembered as the warning that saved millions or the prophecy that went unheeded until it was too late. But one thing was certain. The debt cycle doesn't care whether you believe in it or not. It just happens. Mechanical, predictable, unstoppable. And according to Ray Dalio's models, it was about to happen again. In early 2026, Ray wrote his final warning letter, not to scare, to give actionable steps. Debt crises follow a pattern. First, denial. Second, governments print money. Third, printing stops working. That's the phase we're entering. When printing fails, three things crash together: your currency, your bonds, your stocks. This happened in 1930s America, 1970s Britain, 1990s Japan. It's happening now. His advice was precise. First, gold. Governments can't print gold. Second, diversify across currencies and countries. Third, real productive assets. Fourth, maintain liquidity. Then he said something surprising: the crisis will create the biggest wealth transfer in modern history. In the 1930s, prepared people bought assets at 90% discounts. In 2008, liquid investors bought at generational lows. 2026 will be the same. I'm 76 years old. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I don't need to profit from fear. I'm trying to prevent what happened to me in 1982 from happening to you in 2026. By February 2026, events accelerated. Another Treasury auction struggled. The Fed stepped in as buyer of last resort. More printing. Dollar weakened. Gold hit $3,200. 6 months, Ray told his team. Maybe less. March brought extreme volatility. Markets swung 3 to 4% daily. Gold hit $3,500. Bitcoin crossed $150,000. This is the chaos phase, Ray explained. Right before crisis, markets become schizophrenic. Nobody knows what anything is worth because the dollar itself is losing credibility. April 2026, Ray's 77th birthday. Someone asked how he felt seeing his prediction unfold. Sad, he said. I know what's coming. The unemployment, the bankruptcies, the suffering. Being right doesn't make me happy. That drove him to write one more piece to everyone who thinks this won't affect them. In 1982, I thought I was smart enough to avoid disaster. In 2008, millions thought their homes would never lose value. Now many think the government will fix this. They won't. Not because they don't want to, but because the mathematics won't let them. Don't wait for permission to protect yourself. Act now while you still can. Day 2026. Markets showed serious stress. A major European bank needed bailout. Japan's bond market flash crashed. Australia's currency dropped 8%. Ray's phone rang constantly. Reporters, clients, government officials. He told them all the cycle is playing out. Something has to give. June 15th, 2026. Joint Fed Treasury Statement. Emergency measures to ensure dollar stability. Ray called an emergency meeting. This is it. Once you have to defend your currency, you've already lost. Gold spiked to $4,000 in 48 hours. Stocks dropped 12% in 1 week. Bitcoin crossed $200,000. The final phase had begun. Standing in his office, Ray thought about 1982. That failure had been his greatest teacher. It taught him to respect cycles, to trust mathematics, to never assume you're smarter than history. Now, at 76, his legacy was secure, not because he'd made money, but because he tried to warn everyone who would listen. The man who lost everything in 1982 had been right about 2026. The debt cycle doesn't care about hope. It doesn't care about intentions. It follows its mathematics, relentless and unstoppable, until debt is resolved one way or another. And in June 2026, that resolution had finally begun.